All right. So now that we've talked about the web protocols, we've talked about HTTP and how data is typically sent back and forth. Let's talk about APIs, and then we'll see how we can actually make HTTP requests and get data. So an API, APIs stand for Application Programming Interface. The keyword here is interface. So it is going to be the way that you can connect with the server to, not connect, the way that you can ask for things from a server and the type of data that you get back. So it's kind of like a contract between the two, the two communicating pieces of software. So think of the libraries that we've been using. So APIs can take a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be related to HTTP requests, but it's mostly these are the functionalities that you are able to ask from this piece of software. That is what an API is. So if you think back to when we were using the CSV library with Python, so all the functions that you're able to access, everything that you're able to do with that, that is its API. That is its interface, the way you can interface with that library to have it do something. So APIs are typically now, like today we typically say APIs for, or we call something an API if it can take a request and then give you certain data. But the API as a whole is just what are your, can't explain it good. Let's just start seeing an example of it. So it basically just, an API determines how you can interact with a piece of software. That is it. So we'll be using today a JSON API. So basically you're communicating with a program that returns data in a JSON format. And if you guys haven't seen JSON, it is basically just an object. So JSON, I forget what it stands for. Acronym.
JavaScript object notation.
Yeah, there we go. So it's a JavaScript object. It has key value pairs within curly braces. That is what JSON is. So basically the APIs that we are going to be communicating with today are going to return JSON data when we send a certain request. So there are a lot of APIs that are already out there. So there's a lot of people who have put a program on a server that allows you to request data from that program, and then it returns data to you. So if you just look up free APIs, you can go to this GitHub one with public APIs. There's a huge list of all the public APIs that you can access. So basically, the way these APIs are set up, the person who sets up this API has data in a database somewhere, and they have a program that allows you to request certain things from their database, and then it returns they return something. And each API will have their own documentation telling you what you're allowed to request and what exactly you have to say, or what you exactly have to put into your HTTP request to get the data that you want. So I am going to look for the Pokemon API. We're going to play with that one. So it's not this one, Poke API. And I'll send you guys a link in the chat. Wherever my chat went, there we go. Okay. So if we look at this, we see this is a RESTful API. We'll talk about what that means in a bit. But basically, this is an API that allows us to make calls from anywhere. So we can try a request. So if we submit this, it gives us information. So this is the base of the URL. So we have the request type, the protocol, we have the domain, and then we have the resource. So API all the way till the end, that's the resource. And for this one, if you just do Pokemon/Ditto, it'll give you information on the Ditto Pokemon. So I'm going to copy this. And remember I said earlier before the break, anything that, any type of HTTP call that is put into this will automatically do a GET request. So if I hit enter, I get data back. So this is one way of doing it. You can put it into the browser, you can actually see the data, but we typically want to use it in a program. So to do that, JavaScript gives us some cool functionalities that allow us to do this. So typically when you make a GET request in the browser, it's going to refresh the page, right? If I hit enter, it refreshes the page. If you have a program that, like, let's say you have an HTML page and there is a GET request to get this data somewhere down the line in the page. Because of this automatic refreshing, what is it called? It's automatic refreshing. It's not going to be a good experience. It's going to unload your entire page and reset it, and it's just not going to work. So, to build more elegant, more modern applications, we need a way to send this HTTP request in the background without interrupting the user's experience. So this technique is known as AJAX. So AJAX stands for asynchronous sync with this H. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. XML is another acronym, so it's a nested acronym. So basically, asynchronous JavaScript just means that we're doing work in JavaScript in the background. So in our Python programs, our code kind of runs one line at a time. In JavaScript, there are certain functionalities that you can run in the background. So if it gets to that line, it'll go run it, and it won't wait until it returns. It'll actually just jump to the next line and then keep going. So that way you can make your requests, because requests take, like, let's say 100 milliseconds, but in program time, that's a long time. And instead of having to wait for that and having your page hung up on that, it'll go run it in the background. When it returns, then we can display the data. So this is a useful, a useful method. XML, so yeah, that's the asynchronous JavaScript part. XML used to be the data type, or well, it's the data type that can potentially be returned with an AJAX request. Again, the AJAX request is just going to make an asynchronous HTTP request. But yeah, so XML used to be used, but it's not used commonly anymore. Now it's mostly JSON, so JavaScript object notation. Like we showed before, it just looks like a regular JavaScript object. And yeah, they just never updated the acronym because AJAX is a little weird. But yeah, so this technique was first made possible in the late 90s in Internet Explorer. So there was an object in your browser that is called XML HTTP request, or XHR. So if you well, this is a bad website to see it in. Let's see. So you can see what XHR requests are there. But basically, if it was doing requests in a different way, you can see like an actual fetch happen, which this website doesn't do it. So it's not a good model. Let's see if this one does. I'm gonna reload it. So yeah, we see the type of request. I can do XHR and take out everything else. So yeah, it's just a certain type of request, but we don't really use it as much. It's built into the browser. So modern browsers now have something called fetch that you can use. Well, interesting. Okay. But yeah, so there's an existing function that is built into JavaScript, and it's handled in the browser that you can use to make these requests. We can use fetch to do it, which I'll show you how we will do it in a bit. But we will typically be using a library called Axios. So Axios is a JavaScript library that allows us to make HTTP requests. So it can replaces fetch, which is the built-in one. So yeah, I'll show you an example of each. So let's do that. Let's see some code. I have an HTML document that I started. So all that's in here is a header, a body, and a script. So I have my script attached to a JavaScript file that I wrote. So if you guys want to code along with me and see this, you may do so. And then I have main.js, which is empty currently. So I'm going to add a console log just to make sure that it's loading properly. And then I'm going to run my server. You can use live server, or you can use the Python module. Okay. And so now that we kind of understand servers a little bit, so now like what this is doing, it's starting a program that listens on this port for any HTTP requests. And then it basically serves up our HTML as a response. So this is what this bit is doing. This is what the live server does. It just starts listening to a port, and that's basically what a server is. It's a computer that's listening onto a certain part of the computer, and it handles the requests and then returns whatever responses are necessary. So if I go to my local host, I see the hello here. So that's good. So that means my page loaded. So if I look at my network, there's, oh, I'm only seeing, yeah, let me look at all. So there was a slash request. So this is just the HTML document. And then within the HTML document, there was a script, and that ended up loading as well. Yeah, so let's actually call the Pokemon API and try to get Pokemon. Let's see if we remove this ditto. What do we get? We get 20 items, and it gives us a bunch of Pokemon names. So
you get the first 20, looks like.
Yeah.
And that cuts you off.
Mm-hmm. And typically, yeah, actually, let's do this one and then inspect the response. So I'm going to copy this URL. I'm going to go back here. First, let's demonstrate this with fetch. So I'm going to, hold on, I have it written here because I forget the this here. And I'm just going to grab this and we're going to talk about it. Okay. So first, ignore these right now. Fetch is just a function and it takes your URL that you are going to call, your API URL. So what this fetch returns is something called a promise. So this happens with asynchronous JavaScript. Like I said, this is an asynchronous function. So it's going to return something called a promise. And this promise doesn't actually resolve to a value unless you grab that promise pretty much and then try to force grab the response, which is what the .then does. I don't know if force grab is the best term to describe this. But basically on every, if you're using fetch or you're using Axios, the other library that we're going to use in a bit, it will return a promise. I won't really get into exactly what promises are, but basically when you're performing this request, it'll take a few hundred milliseconds to complete. But we don't want our application to just do nothing while it waits. So it's going to return something called a promise. So the promise is just an object. And this object lets you specify what you want to do with it afterwards. So when you want to do something after this, so you want to use the data, you can say .then. And that's another function. So this .then takes what this promise returns, and we can catch it in a response here. People typically nest these like this, so they just put the .then below it because it's easier to read, but you can put it right after. But yeah, so then we use the response. With fetch, you have to do an extra step where you have to transform it to JSON. So I'm just gonna, oops. Just gonna go this way. So you take this response, turn it into JSON, and then you can grab the data that this response returns. I think Ben might be able to explain what promises are a little better. So I'll have to ask him to redo the promises part. But basically, it allows you to define what you want to happen after this happens, after this fetch gets completed. So let's see what this does. So we're taking a response, we're getting the JSON part of it, and then we are, which then returns from this .then. This .then returns another promise because we don't know what's going to happen then. And then the .then here will take the data that comes out of it and then push it into console log. Chase, yes, I will take you up on that. Let me just show this example and then please do explain what promises are in a more eloquent way. Okay, so if I go to my console, I refresh my page, I see my hello, and then my fetch happened. So if I look at the network, I see these were my initial pages that I saw, and then here, this is my actual Pokemon API request. So if I go back to my console, I returned, I printed out the object that it returned. And I see here now I have an object that has a bunch of data. And typically when you're playing around with APIs, the website and the documentation tells you generally what it will return, but you kind of have to play around with the actual data that it returns and like see what's nested in there and see what you can actually use from it. So here we have a count. So that means like, I'm guessing how many Pokemon are in this database. We see here that, so this next value is the URL for the next 20. So if you want to grab, so this is the first 20 Pokemon. If you want to grab the next one, you grab this next value, you send this in another fetch request, and then that will return more Pokemon. So it will return the next 20 and then the next 20. Previous is null because this is the first page. Yeah, so inside of our results, we see this is an array, right? An array of 20 objects. And then each object has a name and then a URL. And that URL, if we go to that, again, everything in the browser up here is just doing a GET request. So this is what this returns. So if I had put this inside of my fetch, I would see this information inside of my console log. Questions about this?
I think I'm a little confused on when it has to take that promise and then it converts it, I think you said, into a JSON object. What is it prior to being a JSON object? Like it looked like it was already like in JavaScript already.
Yeah, let's print it out. So I'm gonna do console log response. I don't know if this is actually gonna do if I want to do multiple things, I think I have to put it in a curly brace. Okay.
It's not going to return anything.
It's not, right?
Well,
Or-
it'll print that, but it won't return the response.json.
Okay, so if I comment this one out.
No, it's because when you put it into brackets, it's not implicitly returned. You need to put
You have to
return
actually say
JSON.
return.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this was the response. It has a bunch of information with the fetch. So you have body, headers. So this is the headers from the response that was sent back from the server, from the Pokemon API server. And then you have what URL was sent. And yeah, so it has a JSON function, and that's what we called. And that JSON function returns the data in a JSON response, in a JSON format. But Chase, if you want to describe.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch up on some stuff that I thought would be important to know, to understand promises. I'm not really good at the async await stuff, but I understand promises enough. Basically, when you fetch something from a server, let's say you put that fetch into a variable. You would do like fetch content equals. The point is that if you, for example, console logged that content right afterwards without a then function, you would get nothing because it doesn't exist, because your JavaScript's trying to run as fast as it can. So it'll
return the promise object.
Yeah, it'll return the promise, but it won't, the data wouldn't exist if you try to do the .json of the console log in the program. If you want to go back to the JavaScript real quick, if you do the .json to the content, it shouldn't return anything because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Basically, you want to get the content, wait for it to return the content, and then you want to use the then statement to process that response and then return the data once you receive it. So that's the importance of the then statements. I didn't
Let's check it out.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that should work. If you just do that, because
oops, just R. Okay. So yeah, this is returning. So the fetch is returning a promise, and then you're using the promise, which has a .then function.
yeah,
And that function is going to, when it resolves, it will give you like the response or the data that you need.
Yep.
Yep. So here, and now it printed it out.
right. That's the only thing.
Is .then sort of like holding a space for that data to go to as it's running in the background?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Basically, .then just waits for the promise to resolve.
yeah. So the promise, when you do this fetch, this variable is a promise. So the promise has a few different states. Pending means it's still waiting for the response to come back. Fulfilled means it's done, and then rejected it means that there's a failure. So when it goes into fulfilled, that's when it will go into the .then. So typically you would want to chain a .catch, and catch will catch the errors. So that will, when it's when the rejected thing happens, that will go into a .catch, and then you can just grab the error. I don't need to do this. So error, and then I can console log the error or something like that. Yeah, so instead of using this variable, which is just, this is the promise. So you could either do this, but typically people don't do this. You just chain the .then after the fetch.
Yeah. I was just more using that to
No. I mean,
as an example.
Yeah. No, I agree. This is a perfect example. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just like to have a reason, like, why do I need to use the then statement if I can just console log the right afterwards. That's all.
So the promise is basically saying, I promise to give you this data as long as you have something to do with it. And the .then is something you do with it.
Yeah, I guess.
Pretty much. So if you don't have a .then and you just do this fetch and you have some other code here. So if you don't have a .then, you can't really do anything with this. It's just gonna send out the request, may probably come back eventually, but you're not doing anything with the promise. So it's gonna immediately go to the console log, and you won't be able to do anything with it. But the dot allows you to await wait for the promise to resolve, and then you can use the stuff that it returns.
And an interesting thing I think you can demonstrate is that that console log, the first one, console logging the promise, will happen after hey, I believe.
Let's see.
This can demonstrate asynchronous behavior of JavaScript.
Let's do it. Just gonna delete those. Just I forgot the console. Yeah, so I'm printing something wrong. Then taking the response. I think response.json returns another promise.
Yeah, I think
Why we can't,
you need to do another then statement.
Exactly. So that's why fetch is a little weird. So I'll show you when we use
Axios.
Axios, it's much easier. So you only have to do one dot then, and you grab the information straight away. So yeah, response.json returns another promise, which you can then catch. So I can just call it JSON response. And then console log it.
Sorry, initially when you had R, how does it know like what R is?
So R is just a name that you're giving it. So whatever comes before this arrow is just a variable that's gonna come from the previous function returning. So I can name this whatever I want. So R, and then I would say here, this is r.json. So this just, it's like function variable names. You can name them whatever you want, as long as you're using the same name every time. So
it looks like it didn't do exactly what I was expecting. I
did.
don't know why. Oh,
One second.
I was expecting hey before the JSON console log.
It did.
Oh, it did. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, you were right. So it did hello, which is the first thing. It did hey, because it was still waiting on this. But then everything happened after this resolved. So you're able to finish loading your website, do whatever you need to, and then this stuff will happen. So you can load in the data and stuff like that. There we go.
Is it recommended to always have a dot catch whenever you are pulling JSON?
Yeah, because if not, it's gonna just be like a red error. So if I did, let's say I misspelled this, and then I did this. So I get an error here. Page not found. Wait, hold on.
I think it automatically gives an error, but you can specify what it does if it doesn't, if it does have an error with catch.
Yeah, I thought there was a. Yeah, if you want to do extra stuff. The dot
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I think the dot catch works maybe a little differently with Axios. I'm not sure. Okay, but yeah, this is the basic way to make a an API request from your JavaScript code. So you use the fetch, you put the URL, what you want to call, and then that fetch will return a promise. So I'm not gonna do this one. Actually, I'm gonna keep that way. Then I'm gonna do an equivalent. And then you can chain the dot ends one after the other. So these will return the same thing. Yeah, actually, any questions about this before we see the Axios version?
Well, because those are like linked promises, would you have to have a catch on each promise or just at the very last one? I guess?
Just the last thing, because they're all nested. So it'll, or not nested, sorry, they're all chained. So it'll, yeah, you can just have it at the end.
Okay.
So normally you would do like this API request, and then if we wanted to like manipulate the object that we're receiving from the API, we would just assign the final then statement to whatever variable. Is that how
Yeah,
that would
so
look? Or?
within this final then we'll do stuff. So I'll demonstrate Axios and then we'll actually show how we can do stuff with it.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Chase, were you gonna say something?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Other questions?
You hear about like, I'm gonna go on maybe a little tangent. You hear about web scrapers,
Mhm.
right? And the idea of that, does that mean that like somebody's like going in and creating their own, I guess, JSON type file from somehow scraping website and then pulling in data for like, yeah, I don't know how any,
I
like
think-
imagine a website doesn't have an API, but you want to get all its information off of it to use elsewhere. I've seen
Yeah.
that happen.
I don't know too much in depth about web scraping, but the way I think it works is they make a request to the page, you're retrieving like an HTML document or something back from it, and then you're basically parsing the document to see what stuff is like useful. So you follow certain links and you can grab content from it and make it into your own data, but basically there's a step between grabbing the scraped data and then the API pushing that data out. So you need to parse through the data that you pull in and then grab whatever's meaningful for you, probably put it in a database, and then you can push that stuff out. And we will build our own APIs in a few weeks. So
Sweet.
that'll be fun. Other questions? Okay, let's see Axios. So Axios, that was very not the news. Axios HTTP, that's the website. So I can, this is a request. Here's the way to install it. So we're gonna just use the CDN. So I'm gonna grab the script tag here. And you all can follow along if you'd like. And I'm gonna put it right before my script because I need the context of Axios to be able to use in my JavaScript file. So you just put it up here, that loads it into the context in general, and now we can use it. So I'm gonna say this is using fetch. Axios. Okay, so with Axios, it's a little simpler. So you do Axios dot, and then, so there's a few functions that they have. I'm going to go back to the docs. So you don't need to worry about the require because we're not using it in that way right now. But Axios has method functions. So you can make a get request by saying axios.get. If you want to make a post request, you can do axios.post. And so let's just see how to make the get request. So axios.get, and then I'm going to use the same Pokemon API. So this is Pokemon API. I have to put it in string. Which Pokemon do you guys want to see?
Charizard.
Typhlo. Oh.
I'll start with
Pikachu.
How do I spell Charizard?
I have no idea.
Charizard? Is it an E?
Yeah, it's Charizard. So
With an
I Zard.
Charizard. Okay.
Char lizard.
Okay. That makes more sense. That's not what was supposed to happen. Okay. So the get request is gonna be basically like the fetch. It will return a promise as well. So what do I have to do to grab the actual information?
Then convert it to JSON.
The dot then, yeah. So we do dot then, And the nice thing about Axios, you don't have to do that intermediary step of transforming it to JSON and then using it. You can actually just use the response as it is here, which is why it's typically preferred. It does have other features as well that we'll use later on, or we might use later on. But yeah, so now we have the response. I can do whatever I want in here. So I can console log this response, just so we can see what is happening or what it returned. So if I go back to my local host, and this is the object that it sends back, I see here config. Doesn't seem like I really need anything interesting from here. So I'm going to close that back up. Data. Yeah, this is what seems like the proper data that I need. But other things that come back in the response, you can also see the headers. You can see the request itself that was sent. Headers, content type, application JSON, so it returned back JSON. So the most important stuff that we're going to probably use is going to be in data. So I'm going to say response.data. So let's see what's in there. Let's print it out. I could also just explore it from here, but I don't want all the extra stuff. So I'm going to refresh. So now I have the data that the API responded with. So here, this is just a list of abilities that Charizard has. So Blaze, solar power, nice. We have abilities. Forms, different forms. We have game indices, so which games I'm assuming Charizard has shown up in. Height of Charizard, I don't know what units it's in. Let's see, what else? Name, moves, has a bunch of moves here. Let's see, species, sprites. This is interesting. Yeah, so let's try to access the sprites and then make an image appear on the page. So how can I do that? If I know that in my response.data, there is an item called sprites. And within that, let's say, we'll do front default. We want to grab the front default image, and then we want to put that in an image tag. How might I do that? Come on, stay with me, everyone. We have 15 minutes, and then we can go to lunch.
Called dot sprites dot whatever that element was that you're trying to access.
Okay, so yeah, we can access it that way. Let's say I want my image URL, or I'm used to URL equals response dot data dot sprites, right? If I go back, front default, so that's going to be my next dot front default, and then I'm going to print my image URL just to make sure that I have something, like I accessed everything properly. So I'm going to go refresh, and cool, I have an image URL. How can I then add an image to the page? We learned this yesterday.
Put in an image tag.
Okay, how can I do that from JavaScript?
Use create element.
Okay, so document dot create element. What do I have to send in here?
In quotes, img.
Okay. And then
Probably want to make it a variable.
sounds good. So I think I forgot here. I'm surprised that it didn't give me an issue that I used the image URL without using let. So that's interesting. So let image element equal to this. And then what do I want to do?
Wait, quick question. Would you have to put the let image URL outside of that function? Like, so you would do let image URL equals Axios.
No, I would have to put this in there, the creation of that. I forgot about that. Okay, thank you for reminding me. But yeah, so we're creating the element. We could also create, like, have all of this logic in a separate function, and we can just call the function and send the image URL into there. So if we don't want to have a lot of code inside of this dot then, we can put it in its separate function. But yeah, so image element, what am I doing with it?
You need to assign the URL to the attribute source.
Okay. So what's the syntax for that? Is it something that
Create create attribute or something?
No, it's just .src.
Okay, let's see, .src.
There you go.
And then I just send in the image URL.
Yep.
Okay. So image URL. And is that it?
You gotta put you gotta append the image to the document body, I believe, as well.
And how do I do that? Does the create element just return this? It doesn't actually create it to the document?
Yeah, just if I remember correctly, it just creates it creates the image attribute, but it doesn't actually have it part of the document. So I believe you'd have to get the document body, or you can do document.body.append, I think append child, and it should give you image element. Sorry, and then put an image element.
And I'll just do append, and we'll see if I need to do append body or append child.
Okay.
I don't know what because I want to see what append does. So if I refresh, probably need to do append child. Append child.
No, it said image. It said the SRC is not a function.
Oh wait.
Yeah, just
Oh, I
assign it.
didn't read that.
You just set it equal to dot source equals image URL.
Ah, okay. Equals that. And append child. There we go. We have a little Charizard. Actually, it's not little, but the picture is a little small. But yeah, we were able to get the data. So now if I change the name of the Pokemon, give me another Pokemon name.
Psyduck.
Maybe type
Psyduck. I vote for Psyduck.
Is it with
Sorry
an E?
for whoever wanted me to.
PSY duck.
Yeah. Psyduck.
Psyduck's iconic.
There we go. Look at that little guy.
EOG.
Goldeen and Starly. Let's do it. Goldeen. There we go. Oops, Starly.
Is your Diglett?
There we go. What is it?
Diglett.
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 Nerds.
And two
It's
or
Pokemon picture time. Let's go.
is it 1 T or 2 T's? I think it's
At least 2 T's.
2 T's. There we go. So cute. But yeah, that is using Axios. So I personally think it's a little simpler. Axios is a more like professionally used product. So you'll see this used a lot in companies. But yeah, there is a different way of making these requests, but for now, let's just use the .then. There's another way called you have to use an async and await, and you have to put it into another function. But we'll talk about that a little more when we're doing React. If you know how to do it and you want to do it that way, that's okay. But this is the more straightforward way of doing it right now. Okay, I have wait one sec. Just to reconfirm, do you have to get apt-get? No. So you don't have to do apt-get to get Axios. All you have to do is to go to Axios's website and grab the CDN link, and it goes. So they provide you with the script tag that you need to put into your HTML document.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So when we're using React later on, we're gonna import it using npm. So that's a whole other process. But for now, we're just using HTML documents. So this is the script tag. Yeah, in my remaining few minutes, I want to show you guys another way of testing APIs. So making GET requests or making any type of request. So if you can, go to Postman. This is probably one of the best tools that you can have for any sort of API development. I highly recommend you use it. You can, let's see, do I have to sign in? Probably. I think I have it through Google. I believe you can install it without. Yeah, Postman download. I don't think you need an account to install it to your actual computer. So yeah, I would recommend installing it to your computer. If you have never been there, been to, or if you haven't had an account and you're not using like the web version, the first time you want to make an API call, let me see, how do I guess it's just my workspace. Okay. It'll ask you if you want to make a request to localhost, like if you're hosting your own API, you'll have to download Postman agent. It'll just be a pop-up asking if you want to download it, and just download it, and you can do it from the browser. So basically you just start with a new request. There was a plus button up here. You can specify what type of request you would like. You put your URL in here. So if I go back to the Pokemon API and I just grab, yeah, I'll just grab this one, the same one that we did before. Oops, not submit. Then I go back here. I literally just put my URL here. I send, and I get the response back. The reason why this is pretty useful is if you want to modify the headers of your request, if you want to add authorization, if you want to send data, you want to add parameters, you can do all of that within here, and it allows you to test out your APIs very easily. And their actual Postman application is pretty nice too. This web version is, I don't think it's new, but it's new relatively to when I started using Postman. But yeah, so locally it's a little easier. You don't have to install the agent, but you would have to install the actual Postman. Okay, I've talked a lot. Any questions?
Could you show the JavaScript file again? I want to make sure that I understand. I didn't use a pen child last time, so I didn't see.
For sure.
Got it. Okay.
Awesome.
So on this one, the Axios, it doesn't have to use JSON, like it's already in that format.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure I understand. Are there any like drawbacks to using Axios though? It's like, oh, you wouldn't want to use this method. You go back to the other method we use, fetch.
No, I think Axios just adds more functionality, if anything. There is no drawbacks. Just understanding that like fetch is built into the browser, so you can make the requests in the browser if you'd like. Whereas like Axios, you have to actually download it, so or like have a link to it and stuff like that. But yeah.
Where does that what is that on the HTML? What does that link come from again? Like, where did you go to get that one?
So I went to so I looked up Axios docs. I didn't look it up that first time, but yeah, so you can go to the Axios docs. You can, I think it's in the intro. Yeah, so introduction, there's a bunch of ways to install it based on what you're using. So now since we're using HTML, we're gonna want the one with a script tag. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So we're just gonna use the CDN. This one should work too. It's just a different delivery network.
Are we gonna go over async await?
Sure. I don't want to add too much to it, but yeah, so the async await is a different syntactical way of handling promises. So instead of doing .thens and chaining them, you can actually use what is it called? Async and await to grab the response into a variable straight away. So instead of having the response be here in the .then, you can put a variable in front. So I'll demonstrate that. If I'm not mistaken, I have to make a function. I have to make it an async function. And I'm going to call this call API. And in here, trying to remember. Yes. Okay, so just going to copy this code over and then I'll modify it a little bit. So I'm going to do my Axios call, but I'm not going to use the .then. I can put the response into a variable as long as I put this one keyword. So I'm going to say response equals await axios.get. So await is going to allow our program to put the response that was going to happen after the resolution. So remember, this is going to return a promise, and the promise is going to be resolved. So it's going to await that promise to resolve and then put the data into response. And then instead of doing the .then, we can use it like this. So we can use the response and then put everything in here. So if where is my, it doesn't matter. Localhost 8000. Here's my diglet. Oh, that's from the one before because I'm not, hold on, I'm not calling the function. So call API. And this will only work if your function is of type async. So it has to be an async function, and that's the only context where you can use the await keyword. So if I refresh this, yeah, diglet is still there. If I change it to Pikachu, no, it's a K. Pikachu. And I refresh. There we go. We get a little Pikachu. Oh, Mason, you're saying await can be used without having it be in the async function? Let's try it out.
Yeah,
I
that
think
was a newer update, but I think you have to change settings that per your JSON file.
Okay. Yeah, so let's see what error I got. Await is only valid in async functions, async generators, and modules. So, okay, so there's certain settings that you can set to just use await as it is. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so you can technically just use it now by npm initting, and then in the JSON file, just type, just change it to a module. And that's it. I know it's way too much work for this, but that's the way to use it.
That's pretty cool. That's awesome. I didn't know that they did that. Yeah. Questions? Oh, Brent, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, is it a bad practice, I guess, using APIs to, like, you would never store all of the API information in a variable and then just access your variable because of memory issues, or do people do both just depending? Because like right now we're just grabbing one element of one
Yeah.
Pokemon.
It's gonna depend what you're gonna use it for. So if you're only gonna use some of the data, don't hold on to everything else, for sure. Like don't hold on to your entire response. So right now, like this function is pretty small, so I'm not actually holding on to the actual response for much time. So even if I said, I mean, I already do have a variable for my response. So my response is being held in working memory as my program is running. But when it exits this function, it's not going to know about it.
Okay.
Yeah. But typically, rule of thumb, don't hold on to information that you don't need to use, I would say.
How does that fit in with APIs that charge? I know some APIs, they charge you like on maybe not a per call, but like per 1,000 calls or something.
Yeah.
How does that
So,
work?
oh, that's actually a great thing. I forgot to mention one thing. But so typically with the ones that charge you things, they require some sort of API key. So you have to have a key and then send that in so they know who you are, so they can identify you. So not all APIs are just open for everyone. Even if they are free, or yeah.
I think it was Daniel speaking. I think if you wanted to like save on costs, I think that's what you're trying to do, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, that'd be a concern, but I just really want to know how it works in general. Like, how do they charge, and like, how do they know how to charge? But the key thing makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you did want to save on costs, would you not do what was just said of just store it in a variable?
I was
or
just
table?
thinking about that the other day. I think a lot of the paid APIs have constantly changing data, but the ones that have data that's just like Pokemon, I guess well, anyways, what I'm trying to say is you could probably just store that all in a database, so you don't have to keep running accessing the API every time you need data.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, because like a stock price API, that's going to be constantly changing, so you can't just cache that locally. It's not going to work. But yeah, okay.
Just depends on what you're trying to do, I guess.
Dana was right. The key, when you have your access key, the person who owns the API is going to check, oh, has this key reached its limit of calls? If it hasn't, then I'm going to send back the data. If it has, I'm not going to send back the data.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question real quick. Are you able to pull information from websites? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's what a web scraper. We were
is that
talking
what
about that earlier.
that's
Yeah.
what, okay.
Yeah. They're kind of a hot topic on like the ethical use of web scrapers.
Yeah.
But something I learned recently is they actually ruled in the Supreme Court that they are in fact legal. But yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. But yeah, you can, so any request is gonna return something. So it's either if it's recognized, it's gonna return an actual resource. So a lot of these actual web pages return an HTML document. So you can parse through it, you can read it, you can see whatever you want from it and use that data for something. One tiny thing that I wanted to mention. So here you can see in this API list, there's auth. So auth is whether authorization or authentication is required to access the API. So for today, you can try to stick to the ones that say no. HTTPS, that's just if you can use HTTPS with this. But CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. So basically, is the server going to allow like any request or any person to make a request? So for today, because we're using JavaScript, we'll go into more details later, but because we're using JavaScript, you should stick to the ones that say yes. And some of the unknowns are yeses. So you kind of just have to check out the API, see if it works. Honestly, the fastest way to check is just to make the API call from Axios. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. And we'll learn how to make the other ones work. So basically the ones that require or have like CORS requirements, that means that you would have to call it from the backend. And that means Python. And we'll learn about that in 2 weeks. Okay, that was a lot. Any questions?
Yeah, I just had a quick one about like copyright law. Like if I made a Pokemon game, would that technically be, I don't know, breaking some sort of copyright law or no?
I think if you're making money off of it, that's when they start caring. But I think if it's just like your own little website, I don't know if that's a big issue. But
so typically, except Nintendo and Game Freak of America like to DMCA and not claim, but cease and desist any kind of fan games or other non-official promotion of their IP, because they do own the Pokemon franchise and IP. So this stuff is like weird public domain, but if you start making a game or some kind of non-affiliated, even fan attribution, they still have the right to take it down.
So like
just depends on.
If I don't post it, I'm good to go.
Yeah, if it's personal use on your own computer, they'll never know.
Yeah.
If you put it on a website, it just depends on how much the company, the owner of the IP cares, usually.
And Nintendo cares a lot.
I think Disney also does. I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, well, their lawyers care, rather.
Yeah, yeah. True. But yeah, so today there are 2 assignments. First one is, hold on. First one is Pokemon Theme Team. You're actually using the Pokemon API to do some stuff. And then if you're done with that, find an API that interests you and just kind of play with it, have fun with it, try to find something that you can display on a web page. Nothing too fancy. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, I'm gonna stop there.